Alright guys, here's our earthworm that we're looking at today. I want to go over some of the terminology that's on your brown lab. So let's go over the external structures first, and we'll get to the dissecting soon. The front of something is called anterior, and you can see this is the front of the worm. It's usually a little bit thicker or fatter than the back, and so this is the front. This is called anterior. The term for back is posterior, and so that is back here. Other two terms you need to know is dorsal and ventral. Dorsal is top, usually on the worm that's darker. So if you remember, dorsal is darker. That is right here. That's the dorsal side. The ventral side is underneath and is lighter. So dorsal, ventral. From there, segments and septum. Segments are the thicker bands. So right now I'm poking a segment, and the segment runs from about here to here. The creases or lines between the segments are where the septums are. Those are walls inside the worm. So segment here, septum there. Prostomium is the nose, I call it the nose of the worm. And so this is the very front. If I hold it sideways here, you can see it protrudes a little bit. And so this right here is called the prostomium. And if you look behind the prostomium, I can actually poke it a little bit, and its mouth opens up. So there's its mouth. You can see some fluid actually coming out right now. So there's its mouth, and that's where the dirt goes in that it eats. So prostomium, the tip nose, mouth right behind it. Couple of reproductive structures. Clitellum, you've probably noticed on the worm before. It's a swelling. It looks a little different than the rest of the worm itself. So here's the segments, and then kind of smooths out. This is called the clitellum. And you can see it's a little bit of a swelling. It's a little thicker than where the segments are. Then we get to sperm groove and male genital pores. On this worm here, here is the male genital pores. It's about halfway between the clitellum and the mouth. And you can see here it looks a little different than the rest of the worm. And so this is called the male genital pores. And running from the male genital pores, here's another one, male genital pore. Running from the male genital pores all the way to the clitellum is something called a sperm groove. On this worm, it's a little bit darker. It's kind of hard to see. It's a little crease that runs all the way from the clitellum to the male genital pore. That's called the sperm groove, and this is used in reproduction in the earthworm. So that covers all the external structures. Let's get ready for the dissection now. All right, for the dissection, you'll notice I have pinned down the worm here. We have two T-pins, one at the mouth and one behind the clitellum. And this is our scalpel. We're going to hold the scalpel very much like a pen, and we are going to make our first incision just by the clitellum here. So you may be blocked a little bit with the camera, but I'm going to try to make the first cut. We try to keep it tight, which is the reason we have the pins in there. Things cut easier if they're tight. Maybe you notice that from sewing or something like that, from cutting fabric. So I'm going to go almost vertical with my scalpel, and I'm going to move it carefully toward me to try to make that first incision. You have to be patient, and the knife is sharp, so it'll eventually go through. You can see I went through right there, and I'm going to work my way up front. Now, as you dissect, you're going to open up the worm with pins and your dissecting needle, and so I'm going to open it up. You'll notice there's some fluid there. That's just the preservative. It's not blood or anything like that. And I'm going to open up my worm there, and my dissection is started. So you'll notice I put T-pins on the side. There are also septum walls, we talked about that earlier, along here, and so you have to use your pin to kind of break those walls and try to open up that worm as you move forward. So I'm going to kind of open it up here, and I'm going to take my scalpel again, And I'm going to move it forward as I dissect. I'm trying to be careful and patient and not hit the intestine. So there's some more skin, and I'm going to pin it back as I go. You'll notice again I take my needle and I run it along the side as I open it up. And right now what you're seeing here, this is the intestine. And I'm just poking at it right there. It's right there. That's the intestine. And I'm going to continue kind of trying to break those walls so that we can see that better. And as I move forward, it should become more pronounced. So back to the scalpel, and I'm going to work my way down the worm. So we're going to speed this up with video editing in a moment here, because you got to be patient. This will take me probably about 5-10 minutes to get all the way down to the bottom where I can see all the structures, and we'll try to point those out to you. All right, now we are ready to talk about some of the structures you should be seeing and learn on the earthworm. Let's start with the digestive system. Up front, behind the mouth, we saw the mouth earlier, there is a section of tubing called the pharynx. Now, it doesn't look much like tubing here on the worm, but right here, it's kind of whitish, clear colorish. That is the pharynx. Behind it, there's a bunch of junk, and you can't really see it much on this worm. You can on other worms sometimes. But there's a tube that runs from here to the pharynx called the esophagus. So just like our digestive system, we have the pharynx, we have the esophagus, and then we get to our stomach. The worm doesn't have a stomach. They have what is called a crop. You can see here it's a bit more gray. And a gizzard. So crop, gizzard. From there we get to the intestine. And so here's the intestine right here. That goes the rest of the worm, and we could cut all the way back and we would see the intestine. So crop, gizzard, intestine goes the rest of the length of the worm, and you can see here this is definitely more tube-like. Maybe what we would think of an intestine. So there is the digestive system. Pharynx, esophagus, crop, gizzard, intestine. Now, some other structures that we're going to go over. Aortic arches are the worm's hearts. You can see a couple right here. Again, in your dissection, you might see those better. You can look at the PowerPoint I posted as well and see those. But here are the aortic arches. They're black and they're finger-like, and so the worms, they're not hearts, but they are circulatory structures, and those are right here. Again, you can see it when I poke at it, it moves around a little bit, and they're all throughout there. We should be able, if we poked around a bit, we'd find 5 of them, and again, on some worms it's better than others. Seminal vesicles are these white things. They're pretty obvious. These are used as a reproductive structure, and that's what these white things are. White or kind of skin or clear color. Seminal vesicles. Also, we have what is called a dorsal blood vessel. Now remember, dorsal means top. On the intestine, and you can't see it very good with this intestine. I suggest looking at the PowerPoint. You can see it on the crop and gizzard here. In fact, I just moved it. This is the dorsal blood vessel. You can see it here, and it does run along the entire top of the intestine. The last structure I need to go over is the ventral nerve cord. Now, ventral means bottom, so what we have to do is we have to actually pick up and move the intestine. So if I pick that up and move it, you will see like a white line underneath here. So I'll hold that intestine out of the way. And you can see this white line. This is the ventral nerve cord. I can actually pick it up with my needle, move it around. This is the nervous system in the earthworm. So ventral nerve cord right there. So those are the structures you're going to need to know for the quiz. And hopefully you learned something from this dissection.
swag for